The parents did not mention the hero in their will. Everything went to his brother. The shock was replaced by emptiness, and the hero disappeared from life. He stopped paying bills, isolated himself, refused to connect with the world. In the darkness, without light, warmth, and meaning, he suddenly felt relief, the freedom that came through complete loss. No one warned, hinted, or wrote. When he opened the envelope from which the printed text of the will fell out, for a moment it seemed like some kind of misunderstanding. His eyes ran over the lines faster than his brain could comprehend what he had read. His brother's name was mentioned 5 times. His, not once. There was not even any formality, as if he had never existed. His heart suddenly lost its rhythm, and his palms became damp. Spring was flowing, everything around was blooming, but inside him something had just broken. Not sharply and not painfully, but dully and definitively. Like crushing a shell under the sole of your foot. The room was quiet, the trees rustled outside the window. Everything around him continued to live as if nothing had happened. And for him, right now, everything had changed. The will was signed and certified. The seal was real. The date had been there since the fall. That is, his parents had made this decision long before he had last seen them. He remembered their last dinner together. His father talked a lot about business, his mother laughed, his brother told something, joked, and he just sat there, nodding. Nothing seemed suspicious then. Now everything had a different color. All the conversations, all the hugs, all the birthdays, all the thanks for the support, everything had turned into a faded wrapper. He was left with zero. And his brother had everything. The apartment, the bills, savings, the car, the dacha, even the books that he himself had once given to his father. And there was not a single line of explanation. As if he had simply been thrown out of history. He sat, staring at the sheet of paper, and did not move. There were no thoughts. There was only emptiness. The room became stuffy. He opened the window, let in fresh air, but it did not help. It felt like he was swallowing water with stones. The air cut into his lungs. The will lay on the table, and every glance at it brought back a burden. The next morning he woke up late. The phone was silent. No one wanted to write. The day began with a feeling of unreality. He simply stopped answering calls. He wouldn't open the door when someone knocked. He turned off everything that connected him to the world. There was still money in the account, but he didn't plan to pay a single penny. Utilities? Let them come. Gas, electricity, internet, let them turn it off. For nothing. Nothing more. From today on, he lives by new rules. The dishes remained unwashed. The dust on the floor became noticeable. The curtains were closed. The days didn't matter. He didn't count time. He just lived. He didn't go out. He ate what was available. He only turned on the water when it was completely unbearable. The temperature in the house was dropping, but he almost didn't notice it. There was a void in his head that lived a life of its own. When the first letter came with a warning about non-payment, he tore it up without even reading it. After the second, he simply gathered all the envelopes into a pile and threw them away. Why should he pay for anything if they left him nothing? That was his answer. They had made their choice, now he was making his. Every month new messages came. And each time he smiled, reading the debt figures. Instead of shame, a strange relief came. He no longer belonged to this game. He would not serve the system that had written him off. He learned to live in the dark. He bought cheap candles and placed them in the Rooms. At night, they burned like in a chapel. He even liked it. It was cozier without the light. He charged his phone with a portable battery that he had taken out of an old toolbox. There was no internet, and he didn't regret it. No news, no posts, no obsessive thoughts. Complete silence. Not even the radio was on. The world had shrunk to a few rooms. And that was good. The strangest thing was that it became easier for him. Every day something washed away inside him. The resentment was still there, but it no longer burned. He began to sleep better. He was not drawn to the past. Even the photos hanging on the wall no longer evoked emotions. He could look at his parents' faces and feel nothing. It was a victory. Yes. Perhaps strange, but still a victory. When the water became cold, he stopped taking showers. He washed himself from a bowl, like in his childhood at the dacha. He felt his body becoming more resilient. His muscles responded to every movement. He stopped being afraid of the cold. He put on a few sweaters and walked around the apartment as if in a shelter. He was no longer afraid of the dark, the blackouts, or the debt. He was out of the game. And only sometimes, when letters came from the bank, did he put them on the shelf, like a collection. One by one. Everything neatly. There were numbers, dates, a surname. His surname was the only place where it still remained? Not in a will, not in the memory of others, but in automatic messages. And, strangely enough, that was what kept him going in the evenings. He would sit on the old sofa, put his feet up on the table, and light candles. The room would become yellow, soft, as if it were coming to life. There was something real about such evenings. No votes, no decisions, no elections. Just him and this darkness. And so the days passed. He began to be forgotten. Fewer and fewer people wrote. Fewer and fewer remembered. What had once been a birthday was now just another day on a dark calendar. He stopped counting holidays, stopped looking at the clock, and stopped looking for excuses to go out. His world had narrowed down to a few simple things: food, silence, night. All that was left of the past lay in boxes under his bed. Once he had thought he would remember those photos and postcards with warmth, but now they were just sheets of paper with dead dates. The neighbors noticed that he was not appearing in the yard. Some tried knocking on the door, but there was no answer. Only silence, which grew thicker. Over time, they got used to it. People quickly get used to someone simply disappearing from sight. The world forgets who you are faster than you stop thinking about yourself. The most surprising thing was that the fear disappeared. Once he was afraid of losing contact, afraid of being left without money, without support, without a home. And now, when he had lost everything, it turned out that life had become easier. Without obligations. Without a constant feeling of guilt. He began to get up at dawn and go out onto the balcony. He sat there in his old coat, drinking cold water and listening to the street wake up. People hurried, honked, ran, were late. He was in no hurry to go anywhere else. Things in the house were wearing out. The curtains were losing their color. The tablecloth on the kitchen table was torn at the edges. The mirror was dim. But he didn't notice this as a problem. On the contrary, every crack, every stain reminded him that time was passing, and he was still here. The world was moving on, and he remained, like a silent witness. He began to do the same thing every day. He would wake up, raise the blinds, look out at the street, boil water on the old gas stove, peel an apple and eat it slowly. Then he would sit on the floor and look at the ceiling. 4 hours. He imagined that it was changing, that branches were growing from it, like in a forest. He spent more and more time in his thoughts than in reality. His debts were growing. There were so many letters that the door could barely open. He would collect them in bags and put them in the kitchen. There was his entire past, dozens of reminders that he was guilty. But he didn't feel guilty. He hadn't been given anything, he wasn't giving anything back. The world was fair in its indifference. If he had been thrown out of the game, he had the right to live by his own rules. Sometimes he would see familiar faces on the street. Someone would walk by without recognizing him. He had changed. He had grown older. His eyes had become deeper, his movements slower. He no longer wore bright clothes. His hair had grown, his beard had grown thicker. He had become like a man who lived somewhere on the outskirts of the city and only went out into the world once a year. And no one recognized him like that anymore. It was as if he had never existed. One day he saw his brother and his wife. They were leaving a cafe, holding hands, laughing. They looked happy. Their life flowed like a clock that never got lost. He stood across the street and watched. He didn't hide. He just watched them go. It didn't hurt him. It was just strange that everything had turned out this way. That someone had everything, and someone had nothing. But now he didn't want to switch places. At night he dreamed that he was a child again. He ran barefoot through the wet grass, heard his father's voice, saw his mother calling to the table. And then he woke up. And sleep fell from his body like an old blanket. The memory haunted him, but he learned to accept it. Every day there were fewer and fewer things left that held him in the past. All he had was today. And he was no longer afraid of losing it. When his gas was cut off, he started cooking over a fire. In an old tin can he found in the closet. It was a challenge. But also a new experience. He learned to boil water with candles. He learned to warm canned food in hot water. He learned to break down life into simple steps. All he needed was fire, water, silence. One day he heard a noise in the hallway. Someone was trying to open his door. It wasn't a burglar. It was a commission. He heard the key turn in the lock, and the door opened. People in uniform came in, walked past him, and looked around the apartment. They didn't say anything. They just assessed the condition, looked at the documents, took photos. Then they left. They didn't even ask him to explain anything. It was a formality. He was already a statistic to them. After that, he began to prepare. Not for escape, but for the possibility of being evicted. He packed his things into several packages. He took only the most necessary things: an old blanket, a warm sweater, a knife, a flashlight, documents that still mattered. Everything else was unimportant. When the time came, he would be ready. He couldn't be broken anymore. He lived not because of anything, but in spite of everything. Towards evening, he lit the candles again. He sat on the floor, watching the wax flow down the bottle, and thought of nothing. At such moments the world was very simple. No promises, no losses, no hopes. Just him, silence, and fire. And that was enough. He didn't remember how the week had passed. The days flowed into each other like drops in a puddle. When they came a second time, he wasn't surprised. Now he didn't even lock the door. The men in uniform entered calmly, as if into an abandoned room. They walked around, marked something on their papers, and left silently. No one asked why he was here. Why he wasn't paying, why he wasn't clinging to life. They didn't care. They had seen people like him dozens of times. The mechanism worked, it didn't matter who the wheel was. Carrying away, after that, he began to walk around the city. Not to find anything. He just walked. The roads diverged in all directions, but none of them mattered to him. He walked until his legs ached, and then he sat on a bench and just watched everything around him move. Shops, stalls, markets. People tired, people hungry, people happy. Everyone was running around. He liked being an observer. For the first time in a long time, he felt invisible, and that gave him peace. Sometimes he went to the library. It was quiet, warm, and no questions were asked. He took old books that no one had read and sat by the window. He didn't read them, he just held them in his hands, as proof that something in this world still had weight. The papers smelled of dust, the pages cracked like the bones of an old man. In the library, they didn't ask his last name. There, he wasn't a debtor, a brother, or a son. He was simply present. When autumn came, the wind began to creep into the cracks in the walls. Only a faint heat came from the radiators, and he covered himself with everything. He had jackets, hats, old newspapers. He slept in several layers of clothing, as if protecting himself from the winter itself. Food became even simpler. Water, an apple, some crackers. Sometimes he managed to find a penny for bread. Sometimes he didn't. But hunger no longer frightened him. His body was used to living on the bare minimum. He became thinner. His face stretched, his shoulders slumped, but his gaze remained firm. He looked in the mirror and saw not weakness, but a steely emptiness. There were no more attachments. His parents were dead. His friends were gone. His brother was busy. All he had left was himself. And that was enough, because nothing else depended on him. One day he got a call. The old receiver rang so sharply that he dropped his cup of water. The call was short. Just a message that the property case was closed. No explanation. Just a fact. He hung up the phone, wiped the floor, sat down by the radiator, and sat motionless for a long time. It was like a dot. Quiet, but fat. From now on, nothing even formally connected him to what had once been called the family nest. A message was left in his mailbox. He had to vacate the premises by the end of the month. Otherwise, he would be evicted. He wasn't angry. Actually, he never expected anything else. This house had never been his, even though he had lived here most of his life. He simply packed his things. The choice was minimal: an old backpack, a warm jacket, canned food, a knife, a flashlight. He put the documents in a file and put them in his inside pocket. The night before his last day, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, listening to the rain falling outside. He felt no fear. There was nowhere to fall. Now he was at the very bottom. But there was freedom in that. He was no longer controlled by bills. He was not controlled by thoughts about the future. He had nothing to lose. And therefore, he had nothing to fear. In the morning he went out and closed the door. Without emotion. Without looking back. He just left. He walked slowly, like a person who was no longer attached to anything. He left the entrance, walked down the block, and entered the park. There was an old bench. He sat down. He took bread out of his backpack and slowly began to eat. Pigeons circled nearby, and he just sat, listening to the wind rustle. For the first time in a long time, he was truly at peace. In the evening he found an abandoned barn. The roof was leaking, but it was dry in the corner. He spread an old blanket, covered himself with jacket, and fell asleep. Sleep came immediately. No visions, no memories. Just darkness. Warm, like the silence of the night. Now his new home was not a place, but a state. A state in which you no longer expect anything. In the morning he went on. He walked at random. He didn't look at the names of the streets. He didn't remember where he had been yesterday. Every day he started from scratch. Everything he had was on his shoulders. And that was enough. At the bus stops, people looked at him with concern. He could hear it in his footsteps, in their looks. But he no longer tried to seem different. Let them be afraid. Let them bypass him. He didn't need anyone else's participation. In one of the squares he saw his brother. He was standing by his car, explaining something on the phone. His wife was standing next to him. They didn't see him. And he didn't try to be noticed. He just watched. Without hatred. Without pity. These people had their own way. He had his own. Once he would have come up, said something. But now he didn't. Let everything remain as it is. He walked on. It was raining like a bucket. His jacket was soaked. But he walked. And every step seemed right. Because it was his choice. He stopped being part of someone else's script. He no longer played family, he didn't play son, he didn't play brother. Now he simply existed, like a stone, like a bird, like rain. He began to sleep less and less. It was as if his body had become accustomed to fatigue, and his mind to anxiety. He would wake up at night from noises, then lie for a long time, staring into the darkness. He imagined that he was walking along a road he had never seen. Leaves were falling from the trees, branches were crunching underfoot. Someone else was walking somewhere behind, but he didn't look back. He didn't care who was there. He only cared whether this road had an end. Several times they tried to kick him out of the benches where he fell asleep during the day. Once they kicked his legs. He didn't argue. He just got up and walked on. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was an everyday thing. One of the dogs barks, you leave. It's simple. He got used to it. People were like stones scattered on the road. He didn't care who was cold or hot. They all stood still, and they all still didn't move when he needed support. His face changed. It became sharp as a blade. His eyes lost their shine. It was as if there was nothing behind them but a dark void. He no longer tried to look good, didn't try to be liked. Sometimes he would stop at shop windows and see his reflection. Passers-by would walk past him, and he would see their expressions change when they noticed his presence. He was like a spot on white paper. He couldn't be ignored, but everyone tried not to notice him. One day he saw someone taking out furniture near the building where he had once lived. A truck, 3 men. Boxes, bags, chairs. All this past was packed into these things. He felt funny. He stood and watched as everything he had once called life disappeared from the room and was put into the trunk. It was a liberation. There was nothing left that could bring him back. He walked in the opposite direction. Without looking back. He walked for a long time. Then he sat down on the steps of an old house. Everything around him was buzzing, the city did not stop. But it seemed to him that he was already beyond the border. If the world had stopped, he would not even notice it. In his pocket was a can of canned food, matches, and an old notebook. In that notebook were blank pages. But he flipped through them every night, as if he were looking for some message. Maybe he really was. In the morning he saw an elderly woman fall at a tram stop. People were walking by. Some looked, some turned away. He went up, picked her up, and helped her sit on a bench. She said nothing. She just breathed heavily and stared at one point. He sat next to her a few minutes and then left. Not because he was in a hurry, but because there was no point in staying. She didn't need him. And he didn't belong in this world anymore. In the evening, he saw a child crying near the store. There was no one around. He stood a little to the side, but didn't approach. He watched the child tremble. Then his mother came out and took her away as if nothing had happened. He suddenly wanted someone to come out and take him away. But there was no one left. And he knew it. Everyone thought he was weak, that he had given up. But the truth was different. He simply didn't play by their rules anymore. He lived without deception, without masks, without bills, loans, custom smiles. He lived as he could. And every day was hard, but real. At a certain point, he felt that he no longer wanted to move. Not because he was tired, but because everything that was supposed to happen had already happened. He stood on the bridge, holding onto the railing, looking down. The water was flowing fast. He could have crossed over, that was all. But he didn't do it. Because he knew, death is not a way out, but just another escape. And he had already escaped once. He had escaped from his family, from expectations, from everything. A second escape would have been weakness instead. He went outside the city, where there was no longer any noise, no light, no people. He found an old abandoned hut, without a roof, with cracked walls. There he stayed during the day. He went into the forest, collected brushwood, sometimes fished. At night he slept to the sound of the trees. It was hard, but it was freedom. Pure, simple, like water. A few months later he met a man. An old man who also lived alone. They didn't talk. They just saw each other from a distance. From time to time he left something edible near a stone, roots, nuts, berries. He did the same. This went on for weeks. Without words. But it was more than friendship. It was respect. They never came close to each other. Once there was no food. Then again. And then, silence. He understood. But he didn't go looking. Because he knew someone had simply completed their journey. Without noise, without regret. And that was right. One morning he woke up, looked at the sky, listened to the wind, and realized that he no longer felt pressure. Neither from the world nor from himself. His life was no longer a struggle, but simply existence. Pure, direct, without embellishment. And that was his victory. Not in winning an inheritance, not in proving his brother his significance, but in remaining himself. Even when no one recognizes you anymore, the story had no victorious ending. There were no applause, no miracles, no cardinal turns. But the main thing was complete acceptance. He no longer looked for an answer. He did not look for justice. He simply lived. And every day was proof that even without anything you can exist with dignity, and the world, it continued to spin. It made noise, ran, breathed. But there, among the trees, among the silence, among the bare sky, there was a point where everything fell into place. And that's where he stayed.